Hi, everybody. Wendy Day here. I have an industry friend with me. I'm so impressed with this guy because he truly makes something out of nothing always. And it's so wonderful. And you guys hear me talk all the time about how you need a budget in order to succeed in music. And this gentleman here does wonders with no budget. So we're going to pick his brain so that you can apply. Jake Palumbo, how are you, my love?
Wendy Day, thank you for having me.
Are you
Thank
kidding?
you for having
I'm so
me.
happy that you're here. I'm
I
so
really
happy that
appreciate
you're
it.
here. So, Jake, how did you get started in the music industry?
It's a very long story. I will try to condense 10 years into a couple minutes.
Yeah, please do, because I can't edit yet. I haven't learned.
Right. Um, but I was born and raised in Tennessee, pretty disconnected from, the central hubs of the music industry. I was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s in a pre-internet world, so, where I'm from, if you don't find something to occupy yourself with, you're going to get into trouble pretty quickly. So I was messing with music from the time, I was a young child, learning instruments, and as a teenager, that ends up evolving into hip hop and, that kind of becoming my obsession. So when I got out of high school, college was just not really the path for me. I was more interested in life experience and being a musician. So I had spent a lot of my time, on my lunch break at my job. Anytime I had a chance, I would go to, the local bookstores and stuff and read every book I could get my hands on, every magazine. I used to read your columns in Murder Dog. We're talking a few years ago too.
Yeah,
So
that was in the 90s. Not
yeah.
trying to tell anybody like your age or anything.
No, I always say I'm an old kid / young dinosaur. I was kind of born between both eras, but anyway, I just really was into educating myself about the music business because I have an obsessive personality. Like anything I'm into, I get really into it.
Me too.
So I had read all these music books, and the underlying theme was always that you need to try to establish a buzz, where you're at in your hometown first, and then branch out. And I still, to this day, believe that to be good advice. I just think
Within
in my
reason.
case, within reason, in my case, the time, we're talking 2000, 3, 4-ish, when I pressed up my first 1,000 CDs and, quit my job at Sears and, tried to put boots to concrete. But we were still, at that time, we were about maybe 2 or 3 years away from the dawn of social media. So I was still doing everything the old-fashioned manual way, just with no money. So I toughed that out for a couple years, trying to put Johnson City, Tennessee on the map as best I could, and it was just a really easy way to starve to death. Literally, I lost 50 pounds in 2005 I think it was, from, small intake of food. But moving forward, at that time, like I said, maybe if at that time I had started out with social media and things like that, I would have had an easier time. But while we did get some support, we sold a few thousand CDs locally and things like that. That was almost, I don't want to call it sympathy support, but, it was more people, oh yeah, I like what you're doing, as opposed to real fans of what we were doing. Like,
Right.
for the kind of music I was doing, which was slightly left field hip hop in a southern market, at that time, it was like trying to grow corn in Afghanistan in a way. So, reaching a breaking point in 2006, I felt like I had to make some sort of drastic change. So with $75 to my name, I moved to New York City.
Ooh, you're brave.
Yeah. and, spent a few months really trying to connect some dots, to get an apartment and a job and whatnot. So, in the meantime, I'm still making music. I'm still, trying to do my due diligence. And at that time, I was rapping, I was producing, I was pretty much self-contained. Everything that we did, I made the beat, recorded the vocals, mixed it, So at the time I got to New York, I veered off ever so slightly, which ended up bringing me back to my original path, and that was I became an engineer. Now, after a failed attempt to go to audio school, it dawned on me, when you go to audio school, when you finish, the first thing that they do is put you in an internship.
Right.
And then from there, it's up to you to parlay that into some sort of paying work.
Right.
So I thought, what if I just skip that step in the debt, because I already knew a good bit. I just needed, to work under some OGs and, really brush up my skills. So
Right.
I found myself an internship. I was the oldest intern there. Most of the kids were fresh out of high school. And I was an unpaid intern at a recording studio for about a year and a half, in time for them to hire me as an engineer.
There was your school.
Just in time for that studio to go out of business 3 months later.
Oh, man.
Same thing. In the meanwhile, I'm still pressing up my own music. I'm still touring wherever I can, doing small shows across the country, the Chitlin circuit that is sadly disappearing now. And so I ended up, when that studio went out of business, parlaying a relationship to another studio where I got on as a manager. And that ended up, those next maybe 2 years were kind of really my boot camp to the music industry, because that was the first point I was actually, completely paying my bills off of just doing music related stuff, even though,
Nice.
I was still struggling financially a lot of times. But I did that for a couple years. And what ended up happening is, in the midst of, being the studio manager, being an engineer, doing all that, and I would like to stress too, and maybe we'll get into this more later, but I'm not I used to not be a people person. It was tough for me to just, walk up to strangers and start
Same
networking,
Same here.
Right. So
I'm an introvert.
I'm an introvert, and once I get to know you, I'm completely the opposite. But at first, I can be an introvert, but I had to break myself of that.
Yes.
So all the clients that were coming in, I was making sure to establish a relationship with them. It got to the point to where they were calling me directly to book time instead of calling the studio. And then also too, it's a much easier sell, especially when I would find myself in the studio with artists whose music I looked up to or, I appreciated. It's a much easier sell to say, hey, well, I make beats also, or, hey, I actually make music and it's not whack. It's easier sell when they've just had a great session with you.
Right.
Or, they love their mix and match. It's a much easier sell than just a cold call pitch, which they may have already gotten 10 of that day.
Yes.
So to bring us to present day, after done that for, a couple years, the people who bought the studio I was working for were some of the biggest crooks I had ever met in the music industry. And that's really making a statement. And at that point, I felt like I had built up enough clientele that I could venture out on my own and maybe not starve to death.
Right.
And it just so happened that, before they started buying up all the buildings on this block, there was a building right next door that was nothing but studio spaces. And I kind of found my way over here, begged, borrowed, steal. And 6 years ago, it will be 6 years ago this June, I opened up Space Lab Recordings, which was an offshoot of the, poorly funded label I'd been running out of my bedroom for so many years. We opened that up as a studio, and it's grown every year since then. We're like I said, we're here on 30th Street in Manhattan, and ever since then, just.
I love it. The thing that really struck me, Jake, is you said it's been 8 years since you had a day job. And somehow you've been able to make this work. And that's so amazing to me.
I don't always know how.
Right. I get that. Yeah.
But yes, very raw survival skills are needed a lot of times. And really good people skills are needed in order to, keep people from breaking your legs as you rob Peter to pay Paul.
Yes. Absolutely.
But, my day job, the day job I had been working closed the same week I got my first paid engineering session, so
wow.
I don't sleep on signs, but it's been actually 8 years since. And, that was all before I ever wanted to be a musician. That was all I really wanted out of life, was to, put my effort into my dream.
Right.
And not punch a clock for the white man, for a small wage.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And you've proven that you can pull things off with pocket lint and laundry quarters. That's my favorite quote. That in one of your emails, you said, Wendy, I've been able to pull this off with pocket lint and laundry quarters. And I love that. I so get that.
I'm thinking about calling my next album that, actually.
I love it. I love it.
It's kind of it is kind of a metaphor because, just about every bit of logical research that you can read about the music industry will tell you that, if you're not working with a budget of close to six figures, to be able to do everything from hire street teams to radio promoters to, everything you need, basically that if you're not starting with something like that, you're fucked from the get-go.
Exactly.
And again, I don't disagree with that, but I just can't quit,
exactly, because it's a passion.
Right. If the progress had not consistently went up each year, if I'd not been able to, self-awareness is real important as far as, being able to take a look at yourself honestly and to see if you're growing, if you're stagnating, if, and every year, I've truly been able to look back and say, well, we're doing a little bit better than we were last year.
Right.
Even if we may have juggled a million, headaches and, a million disasters, as long as you're steadily growing, then, I just can't bring it in myself to stop.
Exactly. And you're still an artist. You've got the studio, so you've got a way to earn income in the field that you love, but you're also still making music, and it puts you in an environment where you can work with other artists like the Razkazes of life that come through, and
right.
the guys that you've done amazing work for, and you've built relationship with DJs like you were saying in one of your emails. He and I email back and forth and discuss the music industry. And Jake, you were telling me that you built a relationship with Tony Touch so that when you put out, and you helped him for free for a long time, so that when you put out your own album, you didn't need to ask him for help. Not that you would have or should have, but you didn't have to. He stepped up and said, you know what, let's do a 30-minute interview on my radio show and let's play 5 of your songs. And that's just such a,
I think one of the most important strategies that has worked for me, and this requires an absurd level of patience and foresight. I'm sorry?
I told them to take notes.
One of the things that has really paid off as far as, we're playing chess, not checkers. And what has helped me so much in building relationships with a lot of key people in the industry is not bum rushing them when we first meet.
Right.
And, not running up on them with, and I don't blame artists. A lot of times an artist may have a chance meeting with somebody and they think, when is this ever going to happen again? I have to, tell this guy my life story, rap for him, play him, and the thing is, that method is just not effective.
It doesn't work.
And, like in the case of Tony Touch, I was his engineer for, close to 3 years. For the first 6 months we worked together, I didn't even tell him I did music. I just did my job. I made his stuff sound good. And, and then from there, as time went on, it wasn't the first record of mine he'd played. He'd played a few things here and there. But again, by just building a relationship and being cool and, establishing dependability.
Right.
When I did put an album out, I didn't have to go to the guy and say, hey, and beg, borrow, and steal. He calls me like, oh, your album's out? Hey, come on the show this Tuesday.
Right.
And even while I was on the show, one of the records that got played, it was a song, Rest in Peace, with me and Sean Price. One of the programmers at Sirius, Ron Mills, who, again, I had built a relationship with for engineering for one of his artists, and not rushing him when he was in my studio, just doing my job and being cool. I get a text message from him right after I left the radio station saying, hey, could you send me that record? I'm like, yes, sir, coming right up.
Right.
And then a couple days later, I get a message from him, that it was being played on Shade 45.
Right. Our
So,
connections.
it requires a chess level of foresight
Right.
that, when you're politicking amongst these artists, you may not necessarily get your pitch in today. You may not get it in the next time. You may not get it in the time after that. But and being cool and dependable and having your hand out, it'll behoove you later.
Right.
I promise you it will behoove you later.
I think,
and another real quick story about that same thing. A lot of times I got a lesson driven home recently that you're not all. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I love where you're going with this.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, the connection got a little
Yeah,
spotty. I apologize.
The connection's a little bit
No,
rough, but
I had
good.
I recently. Let's see if I can move over here closer to the router. Is that any better?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay. All right. So, as I was saying, I had this lesson driven home to me recently. I got a call. I was going to be out of town the following week, and I knew that Drez from the group Black Sheep records here. And I knew that there were some camera people coming to talk to him while I was going to be gone. So I get a call on a Friday. We're super busy. I'm stressed out. Somebody calls on the other end of the line and says, hey, I was wondering if I could come down and check out the space, take pictures, get ready for the shoot. And I'm almost kind of curving the guy on the phone because it's busy. We're stressed out. I'm shorthanded. And out of the blue, he says, I'm sorry, are you Jake Palumbo? That kind of took me aback because I'm not that famous. So I said, yes, I am. Why do you ask? And he says, I don't know if you remember me. My name's Dave. I'm from Complex. And he goes, I don't know if you remember me, but I used to be the DJ in a group called Psyche Origami from Atlanta. And we played a show with you in Johnson City, Tennessee, 11 years ago. And when they were in my town, I looked out for them. And,
of course, you do what you do.
People did the right thing. And so 11 years later, he's like, you live in New York now and own a studio? I'm like, you live in New York now and you work for Complex? So I say that to say, at the time I did the show with this guy 11 years ago, I was just, being hospitable to them to do it because it was the right thing. But then 11 years later, the people who truly last in this business, when I first moved to New York, I was under the impression that the music business was this vast field of, thousands and thousands of people.
No.
And after being in it for this long, I realized, no, it's actually the same 500 people.
Yes, if even that many.
If even that many. So, it was crazy. I'm like, okay, so now that we're in a position 11 years later where I'm Jake Palumbo with a little more juice behind my name, and he's, chief of media something at Complex, there's no introduction required.
Right.
So, it's things like that you can't buy that.
Right.
That only really comes with, with patience and being thorough with people.
Exactly.
So,
and
you're not always networking for now, you're networking for later too.
Exactly. And I'm taking notes while you talk because you're saying some amazing shit. And you're saying that making the organic relationships with the people in the industry without running up on them looking for a handout or running up on them and blitzing them with whatever you're looking for has allowed you to build the relationship that you need to get a favor when you need it. Not that you're doing this for the favor, but you're doing this because it's the right thing to do and you're building a relationship. You're not pushing up on somebody to do something for you when you don't know them.
Right.
It's
at the end of the day, it's kind of common sense, but we forget sometimes that people in the music industry are people.
Yes.
They're stressed out about their phone bill just like we are, and so you have to, it may not yield you the results you're looking for this second, but over time it will.
Exactly.
So
do you have any bits of advice that you could share about how to get through the struggle that you go through when you don't have money and you got to kind of make it happen?
Yeah. It's a lot of things, like I said, self-awareness is really a big part of it, in that you have to kind of figure out what your lane is. Meaning I kind of knew from the get-go that I was not pursuing the Jay-Z lane, the Nelly lane, the Pitbull lane, like,
And that's
you know,
okay.
and that's okay. Like, that
Absolutely.
truly is okay. Like, you know, you know, I might only have 5,000-6,000 something followers on Instagram, but those are all real
They're
fans.
fans. They're loyal. Absolutely.
And that was built. I started my Instagram account out with 5 followers. You know what I mean? Yeah, that was built up, over time. And like I said, it's a smaller number, but that's 5 to 6,000 people, who engage with my content every day. So,
Right.
And look, with that many people engaging in your content, you can feel kind of popular sometimes.
Yes. Yes.
I watched a thing with Chuck D one time. He said, a major label might laugh at 50,000 as a small number, but if I ask you to count from 0 to 50,000, you're going to get mad at me at about 300. It kind of is a small army. So I've always, aside from realizing what your lane really is, and like I said, I may have less fans than a lot of artists, but I make a living making the music I want to make and giving it out to an audience who cares.
Who wants it. Exactly.
Who actually wants it, right? And it allows me to not waste time promoting it in areas where, it might be futile.
Right.
So self-awareness is definitely key, but I think another thing really too is nurturing the fan base that you do have, even if, again, there was a time my fan base was in the hundreds. And before that, there was a time my fan base was in the tens, but that whole way, instead of stressing out about why these numbers are not larger, I tried to focus on trying to make those people that were there into super dedicated fans.
Right.
It can be anything from giving them exclusive content to sometimes, back when I had more time, I can't really do this anymore. But back when I had time, sometimes I would just go through everybody on our mailing list and just send them a quick little personal, hey, how have you been? Thanks for subscribing. And stuff like that makes people feel like they're not just a number.
Exactly.
And,
they matter to you.
That you tuning in matters to me. And, if they get excited about it, they will tell their friends about it. People always like to be up on things that other people are not up on yet.
Right.
So there was that. A mistake I made early on that, I didn't correct until a few years ago. I wish I'd corrected earlier, was not paying enough attention to my analytics. Meaning, I used to post things on Facebook or MySpace or, whatever it was. And, I would just look at the number of engagements that it got. And if the number was high, I was happy. And if the number was low, I was sad. Instead of taking a look at where these clicks are actually coming from.
Right.
I was in the studio one time with a guy named Mario Sprouse. He was a composer, worked on a lot of Gordon Parks movies. And he'd been in the music business for 50 years. And I'd asked him one day, I said, how have you kept your sanity through this for so many years? And he said, you have to remember that the music business is no different than selling toothpaste or soap or, you're selling a product. You have to identify who your customer is. You have to advertise and promote in the places where your customer is known to congregate, and and build from there. So nowadays, especially any artist who's got a Facebook page, who has even Instagram started showing analytics now. Take a look at where your clicks are coming from. If you're noticing that you're getting more clicks from Texas, or from California, or from, fill in the blank, then read into that and see that you need to put a little bit more juice into. It can be as simple as sponsoring a Facebook post, which can be done for so cheap.
Pennies, yes.
Pennies. I mean, literally pennies. And naturally Facebook has changed their algorithms to where people don't see your posts as much unless you sponsor them. And I mean, that's their right, I guess. If people are hustling on their block, they're going to get a cut. But, for $10, for literally for as little as $10, I put out a music video maybe about 2 months ago, with me, Tech from Smith & Wesson, and Rusty Jooks. And when I posted it on my Facebook artist page, I'm looking at the traffic, and I'm like, oh, really? That's all the views? That's all the, clicks? Sponsoring that same post for $10, I ended up with 7 or 8 times the response.
Wow.
Now, as far as I'm willing to go with that, they're willing to, keep making sure more and more people see it. Right. So, right. but really, right. But really, it's not, I kind of learned this from my parents too. Like, instead of focusing on what you don't have, focus on what you do have.
Right.
Which in my case was the ability, because I was used to doing everything myself, because I had a studio and worked in the studio space, we have the ability to produce music at high volume for nothing, just our sweat labor, so for the few, the proud, the fans that tune in regularly, we've released 36 titles in 10 years. Not all mine, I have 4 solo projects and 2 group projects, but regardless, for the people who do care, they have been well fed with content. Also too, I've never in my career had a booking agent, ever. I started to think that they went the way of the dinosaur, unless you're at the very top of the food chain. But one of the ways that we have gotten, one of the ways we have gotten shows over the years is trading shows with other artists. Like, for example, if I meet an artist online in, oddly enough, you wouldn't think this, but one of the biggest markets that buys our music is Tucson, Arizona. Last time I did a show in Tucson, I'm playing. Who knew, right? But it began because I was collaborating with an artist out there named Cypherface, who had a strong local hold, and we started doing some music. So he brings me out there to do a show. I return the favor in New York, because most every artist is going to have some sort of grip on their local, scene. Right. So they're able to lock down a venue and get you added to that bill, and you're willing to return the favor to that same artist in your town. You can put together a DIY tour that way. I'm not saying you're not going to run into a million clusterfucks along the way, because you will. We've had the tour vehicle impounded. We've, all types of stuff. But, but this is what I'm saying is that, I wouldn't have thought that, Tucson would be a big market for me, but it is. So when I'm doing my promotional efforts and I'm looking at where these ads are running, I'm making sure that there's a little bit more juice going to this area, because they've been known to actually buy music. I do shows in New York, and it's not just me, it's the New York scene as a whole. But, doing shows in the city of New York, we might be doing good to get 30 or 40 people out. You know what I mean? But going to a lot of these, don't be afraid to go to smaller towns too.
I agree.
Because, in New York, people are very jaded in New York, because like tonight, if we wanted to, there's 30 shows we could go to.
Exactly.
So, people are less inclined to go out, if we're going to Flagstaff or, to Clarksville, Tennessee, or something like that, where that might be the only entertainment that's coming to town for a week. It doesn't always matter if you're a big artist or not. A lot of times, and sometimes we found our most loyal and repeat customers and most loyal fans in those smaller markets, and they seem to really appreciate, like, yo, you traveled out this way to come rock with us. It goes farther than you think. But I don't know. There's a lot of different stuff, but it really boils down to working smarter and not harder.
Right.
Because I like to say everything I ever learned, I learned by fucking it up. I did. A mistake is the best teacher you could ever ask for. Even if you get some bruises along the way. I think of like all types of just efforts I put into the wrong places, you got to work a little smarter, a little harder. I will say this. being an artist trying to make an impact without a budget is kind of almost like being a handicapped athlete. That's not to say you can't do it, but you're going to have to work twice as hard every, if you're minus an arm, your legs are going to have to be strong, in that aspect, it's almost like having a handicap. Yes, you can still do it, but you've got to, you got to be really good, and you have to have an extremely high tolerance for pain. I mean,
right. And for risk.
Low risk is always low reward.
Right.
High risk is high reward, but it's high risk.
Right.
So, and I always stress to people too, make sure that whatever you're doing, you're happy at it. Because if I was not enjoying myself, I would go get a job with health insurance.
Right. It would be a miserable existence if you weren't happy.
Yes.
This would be work, like really work.
Yes. Every with the studio, with my label, with the production, everything, I start every month going racks and racks into debt, so that by the end of that 30 days, we can be back up to above water. And, somehow miraculously every month, that's what happens. But, that's a period of 28 days each month of uncertainty.
Exactly.
Yeah. But definitely make sure that you, it sounds that way, right? But definitely make sure you're enjoying yourself and nurture the fans that you do have instead of worrying that your number is not large enough.
I agree. I'd rather have a very dedicated small audience than a large audience of people that don't give a fuck.
Just right, Yeah.
Good advice. Jake, you have been awesome. You see, guys, why I interviewed him? He's awesome, right? Jake, thank you so much for this. This has been so helpful.
I appreciate it. I like I said, you were one of the first people that really taught me the ins and outs of the music business, and taught me to look outside the box. So I really appreciate you having me, Wendy.
Very impressed with you. Thank you so much, Jake, and thanks for your time today.
No problem. Thank you so much. All right.
Bye.
Bye.